Thank you all for joining us. My name is Lee Rayford, and I'm a professor of African American and African Diaspora Studies here at UC Berkeley. And I am the director and co-PI with Professor Tiana S. Pichel of the Black Studies Collaboratory. The Collaboratory is a recipient of a Mellon Foundation Just Futures grant, a collaborative initiative to address racial inequality through bold and unique humanities-based research projects. Today's event, Black Love, Black Power, and Black Families in America, Part 2, was thoughtfully curated by our activist fellow, Zach Norris, and is part of a larger spring event series organized by the Abolition Democracy Fellows Program of the BSC. You can find out more about our spring series every Wednesday through April 30th this semester at our website, blackstudiescollab.berkeley.edu. I'm joining you today from my home not far from the campus of UC Berkeley, sited on the territory of the Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone, the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familial descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. We acknowledge and pay respect to Muwekma Ohlone ancestors, peoples today, and the Muwekma Ohlone future to come. One way to make concrete and material such acknowledgement is through the payment of Shumi land tax, a material way for non-Indigenous people living in the East Bay to participate in the rematriation of land to Indigenous people. And I believe there's a link for folks who want to learn more in the chat. Before I turn it over to Zach Norris, curator and moderator of today's event, Tiana, Pichel, and I want to thank all of those who have made today possible. BSc Project Manager, Barbara Montano, BSc Graduate Student Assistant, Gilberto Rosa Duran, Undergraduate Research Assistant to Zach Norris, Alecia Harger, the Department of African American Studies and its great chair, Professor Nikki Jones, Educational Technology Services for their excellent tech support. I want to also thank our Spanish language interpreters for today, Marcy Valdivieso and Elena Velez, as well as our captioner. I also want to thank the Andrew Mellon Foundation. And of course, I want to thank today's panelists, Erin Miles Cloud, Dr. Dorothy Roberts, for making the time to join us. I want to thank the ancestors who are with us and all of you for joining us in the webinar. And I want to thank the curator and moderator of today's event, Abolition Democracy activist fellow Zach Norris. Zach was born in San Francisco, and after 1 week, he likes to tell us, moved to Oakland, where he was raised. Zach received his BA from Harvard, followed by his law degree from NYU. Zach also studied at the Labor Community Strategy Center's National School for Strategic Organizing in Los Angeles, and in 2021 was named a Soros Equality Fellow. In November of last year, he stepped down from the position of executive director of the Ella Baker Center, a formidable organization where he began working some 20 years before as an intern. Zach has brought so much to the Black Studies Collaboratory over the course of the year as he researches and develops this project on family separation, which this two-part series is part of that thinking. We thank you so much, Zach, for organizing this important and urgent event, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Lee. I really appreciate that warm introduction. And I also want to thank Tiana Pichel for both of you for your leadership in the Abolition Democracy Initiative and the Black Studies Collaborative. It's really an honor to be the activist in residence. I still think it's like the best title I've ever had. So I really appreciate the opportunity, and just the fellowship, and the amazing other participants have been amazing. Also want to thank Alecia Harger, who's going to be moderating our Q&A with the audience after the panel. I just want to also thank you all for being here. I want to thank Marcy and Elena for translation, and I'm going to work on speaking slowly to make sure that we facilitate the translation. And I also want to thank you, Lee, for the land acknowledgement. I am, as you said, proud to be really raised in Oakland. I was born in San Francisco. We moved to Oakland when I was a week old. I like to say it was a week too late because I'm just that proud of being from Oakland. But I recognize, as you did, that these are not our lands. And I was just talking yesterday with Dina Gilio Whitaker, who's a professor at Cal State East Bay, about the dispossession and genocide of indigenous peoples, and the way and we were talking about Bruce's Beach in Los Angeles, where there were reparations paid to a Black family who had been dispossessed of their land, but less acknowledgement of the lands upon which indigenous people had resided since time immemorial. And so I think we're going to really delve into today how white settler colonialism and racial capitalism have informed and defined families. And in part one of this series, we talked about that construction of family and the construction of the white nuclear family almost as kind of a weaponized structure against families of color and Black and Indigenous families in particular. And this is part two of that series. It is called Black Love, Black Power, Black Families in America. And I am just so honored to have two amazing panelists join me today. We're joined by Dorothy Roberts and Erin Miles Cloud. And I'm going to go ahead and just read a little bit of their bios. Dorothy Roberts is the George A. Weiss University Professor of Law and Sociology and the Raymond Pace and Sadie Tanner Mosel Alexander Professor of Civil Rights at UPenn. Dorothy is an acclaimed scholar of race, gender, and the law, and joined the University of Pennsylvania as its 14th Penn Integrates Knowledge Professor, with joint appointments in the Department of Africana Studies, Sociology, and the Law School. That's a lot of different schools, where she holds the inaugural Raymond Pace and Sadie Tanner Mosel Alexander Chair. She's also founding director of the Penn Program on Race, Science, and Society in the Center for Africana Studies. Her path-breaking work in law and public policy focuses on urgent social issues and policing, family regulation, science, medicine, and bioethics. Major books include Fatal Invention: How Science, Politics, and Big Business recreate race in the 21st century, Shattered Bonds, The Color of Child Welfare, Killing the Black Body, and has a new book coming out on April 5th, Torn Apart: How the Child Welfare System Destroys Black Families and How Abolition Can Build a Safer World. So excited to talk with you, Professor Roberts, about that book. And as Erin Miles Cloud said, you define so much of how we understand what's happening. And having read your book, Shattered Bonds, I just so appreciate it. It's indexed, it's categorized, it's so integral to the research that I've been doing as a fellow. And just also want to acknowledge the amazingness of Erin Miles Cloud, who's worked as a family defense attorney at the Bronx Defenders for nearly a decade, is now the co-founder and co-director of Movement for Family Power. In her work at the Bronx Defenders, defended parents from one of our most violent carceral systems, the Child Protective Services, one of the most profoundly racist institutions in America. And as a supervising attorney and team leader at Bronx Defenders, met children who grew up in the foster system, only to see those same children later be judged as parents by the institutions that had raised them. Erin writes, I tried to fight the civil death penalty, termination of parental rights, but for Black and Latinx families, this seemed an impossible battle to win. The challenges my clients' families faced were ones that many of our own families face: substance abuse, intimate partner violence, mental illness, etc. However, because of race, class, gender, sexual orientation, the response to these social issues was always punishment. Erin is someone who has been impacted by these systems herself and is one of the co-authors, as I understand it, of Whatever They Do, I'm Her Comfort, I'm Her Protector, which is just an amazing, amazing, amazing resource on the intersection between the family regulation system, as Erin calls it, and the drug war. I was blown away reading this report and had, as Lee mentioned, been doing this work for about 20 years. And so I couldn't be more excited to stop talking and to really pass the mic to to Erin and Dorothy, and just really appreciative of you all for responding to my email and being willing to talk with us today. So the first question we're going to start with is really just to talk about what is family? What does family mean to you? Personal, legal definitions, however you want to respond to that. If you could start with just, and a little bit of introduction of yourself. Appreciate you both. Who wants to start?
Well, I'll go ahead just so that we don't have a long pause. But first, I have to say thank you for organizing this wonderful discussion. I'm so looking forward to talking with you, Zach and Erin, whose work I truly admire. I'm so grateful for, and looking forward to. Is Alecia going to be? I missed that. Is she going to be part of this too? So I'm looking forward to engaging with her as well. I'll say I'm at my office on the Penn campus right now. I usually do this from home, but I teach right after this, so I'm no time to get to campus. And so either at home or here on campus in Philadelphia, I'm speaking from the land of the Lenape people, and give thanks to them for tending to this land for generations and generations and generations, and acknowledge that it was stolen from them. Thanks also to Lee for her opening introduction, and everyone at the Black Studies. I don't know, is it collaborative or collaboratory? I heard both of those, but
I probably got it wrong. It's collaboratory.
Collaboratory. Okay, that's a cool name for everybody involved and everybody here. I forgot you were going to ask us that question, so I'm kind of caught off guard. But I think, to me, family is a social relationship, first of all. Of course, there's legal definitions for it, but I think the legal definitions, as someone, I teach family law, and so I'm pretty familiar with these legal definitions. In fact, today, right after this, I teach my reproductive justice class, and we're going to be discussing the cases about unmarried fathers. And one point I'm going to make to the class is how the Supreme Court focuses so much on what the marriage relationship, so that husbands get priority over fathers all in our legal system. And marriage is legally the center of a family, notions of family, the nuclear family. And I don't define it that way at all. I define it as the people who love you and care for you are your family. And also, I don't define it as being a genetic or biological relationship necessarily. Of course, it often is, but it doesn't have to be. And that's also departs from the dominant views. But I have to say, I once wrote an article called The Genetic Tie, where I really condemned the way in which in the United States we focus so much on genetics as the basis for important relationships. And I remember being warned when I wrote it. This was before I knew a lot about family policing and hadn't written anything about it. This is back in the 1990s, early 1990s, when I first started teaching. And people I knew who worked in family defense at the time warned me not to be too critical of biological relationships, because that's sometimes all that, Black families, impoverished families could point to in court. But all of this is political. It's not whether it's biological, genetic, social, which social ties are important, which biological ties are important. And all of that is interpreted in our dominant society in terms of a hierarchy of white supremacy and racial capitalism. So I think it's important to recognize how political this is, as well as how important it is to our identities, our lives, our survival, families that truly care for us. That to me is what makes a family. And I think those relationships are there. I know they're essential to me, So just to say a little bit about that, I've never encountered myself. I've been threatened once. I write about in my book with being reported when I took my son on trips too much with me and didn't have him attend kindergarten enough. But I've fortunately never encountered it, but the family policing system myself. But I have 4 children, 2 grandchildren who are the joys of my life. And I feel very passionately about this system that destroys, disrupts, punishes those important relationships that people have on grounds of the devaluation. And that's at the heart of it, just not valuing Black people, in particular, Black people's family bonds. So that's just a little bit about me and how I think about family.
Thank you, Professor Rappers. Appreciate it. Thank you, Dorothy. I'm going to pass it to you, Erin.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone for inviting me. My name is Erin Miles Cloud. I use she, her pronouns. I'm also calling from Lenape land, which was, and now politically where I am is known as the South Bronx, but originally Lenape land. I am a light-skinned Black woman. I have an afro and a puff today with roots. If I'm really close, you can see the gray. That's really, truly indicative of where I am. I'm wearing glasses. I have a gold necklace on and an olive green sweater. And I just want to really thank Zach for having us here, really Alecia for doing the writing and coordination of the questions, Barbara, who had to resend me the link right before I got here, and all of those logistics. I just appreciate that. And Lee, thank you. It was really great to meet you, and I appreciate your thinking and thought process and having us in this space. And one small correction, actually a big correction, I do not politically identify as someone who's directly impacted. The system has been in my family's life quite in almost every iteration in my family, but I am not someone who is a parent or a child. Isn't my political identity impacted by this particular system? It's in my family. And also want to give a lot of shout out to my co-director, Lisa Sengoy, who penned much of the report that you all are referencing. So that big breath, the question, what is a family? First, I'm going to say this many times in today's panel, whatever Professor Roberts, whatever Dorothy said, I'm just going to cite that. And then here's some other things too. So I think we all are really grateful for the analysis that she put in pen to paper that really helped a lot of us see what was happening in our communities, in our families, and in our society. And I have a lot of gratitude towards you writing those words on paper because they really helped me understand the social and political conditions of our life. And when I think of family, The legal definition is very narrow, and we can spend some time on that, right? But it really essentially, without going into the technicalities of legal definition, I can pretty much say the legal definition protects the institution of marriage. It protects the categories of individuals who have met the legal definition of marriage, right? So it has not been an expansive definition. It is deeply rooted in a two-parent heterosexual household, and that is essentially it only really recognizes biological relationships between father, mother, child, right? And then branches out from that particular perspective. And that legal definition is also then reinforced, reflected in our social and cultural understanding and how, children are raised in books, how it's taught in schools. And so it's always easy to start with the legal definition because it's so narrow and so small that it's easy to kind of start there. But to me, when I think of a family, I really think of family as a network of people who share responsibility in supporting, loving, and building social and political understandings of self and relationship of self to society and the political bodies. And so it's really a network, right? It's really a collective that comes together to really endeavor and a responsibility of raising each other. And that network, that shared responsibility, that collective really then has some responsibility, either purposefully or because of the world we live in, to have a formation that either mirrors society or doesn't mirror society, right? Because the family is always in relationship to a larger social construct and a political construct. So as we get into this conversation, we discuss the enormous disaster that is our family policing system, we can then understand that when we attack this network, we are both attacking the network of people, the nuclear family that is the network, right? But we're also attacking that network's relationship to a social construct. So that becomes disrupted. And we also are disrupting that relationship to political identity. And so it cannot be, we cannot overstate the impact of punishing families in the way that we're doing it. Because it is a massive ripple impact, and it's purposely designed to do that. It is a tactic, it is a strategic tactic to make sure that we are not having healthy bonds in relationship to each other, to society, and to our politic, right? And so that's how I understand, family. I will also say that I have used the words like relationship to self, loving, and building, but I also want to be clear. I do think families are also networks that both love and harm each other. And I think that's really important to say because I don't want to fantasize about this network. I have yet to see a human network that doesn't do both harming and loving at the same time. And so I believe that that network is inclusive of those things. And we have to learn how to address both sides of love and harm if we're going to be moving forward.
Wow, powerful. So appreciate you, Erin, and also appreciate you for reminding me of some thanks that I didn't give. I also wanted to thank Barbara and Gilberto for helping to bring this together, and realize I didn't really say very much about myself. I am the former executive director of the Alecia Center for Human Rights, and sort of how I come to this work is working with families of incarcerated young people in the state youth prison system. And that's where I saw both the pain of family separation, but also the promise and the power of family organizing. And we were successful in working to close 5 youth prisons across the state of California. And in 2020, the governor signed legislation to close the last 3 state-run youth prisons in the state of California. And the work obviously continues, but I think it was indicative of what you'll hear about more today is really about families organizing to challenge these systems that have been harming Black folks in particular for since our arrival here. And I want to start to head in that direction to talk about the origins of the child welfare system. And as Erin was saying, so much of the foundation for what we're going to talk about, at least in my mind, has really been documented by Dorothy, Professor Roberts in Shattered Bonds. And I want to lift up two quotes that I pulled. The first quote is, "Three prominent images of Black mothers cast them as pathological: the careless Black mother, the matriarch, and the welfare queen. These images symbolize traits Black women are supposed to have that are detrimental to their children." So that's quote number one. The second quote, "The first maternalist welfare legislation was meant for white mothers only. Whereas European immigrants could be assimilated through cultural reform efforts, Blacks stood outside the bonds of redemption." So I'm going to start with you, Dorothy, and ask you to describe the origins of the child welfare system. How was the modern child welfare system created? And why and how was this modern system differentiated from its predecessor?
Thanks. Well, I think to understand where the modern child welfare system came from, and I guess by modern, I might say the system that we have today that focuses so much on child removal and placing children in substitute care, especially what's called foster care. I think we actually have to go deeper than the most recent origins of that system, the formal system, to really understand the long history of the idea that Black families cannot take care of themselves and that Black children are better off under the supervision of white people, that Black people don't have strong family bonds, that the state has to worry about protecting, the bonds of family members, but can easily tear families apart. Now, that idea goes all the way back to the institution of slavery and the reality that Black people were considered the chattel property of white enslavers who could and often did tear families apart legally. There was no thought to the idea within the slavery system that Black people could have families that they determined themselves and that they could determine the future of. They could be split apart. They were often split apart by courts. And I think this is also important to note that there were auctions that where courts ordered and allowed the purchase of parents and children separately from each other. So I think it's really important to go all the way back to the very origins of Black people's presence in now the United States to this brutal kind of family separation. Then the formal child welfare system for Black people actually started during the Reconstruction era, right after the Civil War, when white Southerners wanted to re-enslave Black people. And we've heard more and more about how prisons were expanded in order to resubjugate Black people, the convict leasing system, the Black codes that allowed for police to pick up Black people, that's men, women, and children, on bogus grounds, just for being there without permission, leasing out Black people to work in mines and railroads to rebuild the South. But an integral part of that attempt to re-enslave Black people through prisons was also re-enslaving Black children through apprenticeships. And courts would hear petitions that Black children were being neglected by their parents. It's so similar to what happens today. And then order that the children had to be apprentices, so-called apprentices, sometimes of their former enslavers. And there were tens of thousands of newly emancipated Black children who were put back into the homes on plantations and farms of white people to work for them under this so-called apprenticeship system. And to me, I think that is the origin of the modern child welfare system for Black people. Now, at the exact same time, during the 1800s, the US state was waging wars against Native tribes, dispossessing them of their land, committing genocide against them. And a weapon of war by the military was to take Native children from their homes and tribes and put them in boarding schools, and later on to get them adopted into white homes. So that also is critical basis before we even get to what most of the time child welfare advocates, say is the origin of the modern child welfare system. This kind of just stark oppression of Black people and Native people was going on through child removal. And then even if you get to the narrative about the origin of the child welfare system, which focuses on charitable groups rescuing white children from abusive homes, that all is a myth. But it was a reform. Fostering was a reform of what was happening before. It was asylums, just putting impoverished people, children and parents together in workhouses, poorhouses, asylums. And the reform was to put these children into private homes and sometimes orphanages. But again, they were being put into homes to work. And this wasn't a social service for everybody. It was a way to deal with poverty in immigrant European neighborhoods and children, who were living in the streets. And so they were taken and separated from their parents through court order and put into these foster homes where they worked. And by the way, the narrative of Mary Ellen, who was saved by the American, animal ASPCA for animals, that they saved her from an abusive home. Actually, she had been placed in a foster home where she was being abused. So even the fake narrative, is based on an example of a child being taken from her mother and put in a foster home and then abused. So, and then there were also the orphan trains where immigrant children were put on trains and on the East Coast and sent out to the West Coast and to the Southwest to work on farms. That's the origin of the child welfare system we have today, so-called child welfare system, a family policing system, which from its very beginning has always been a system of state violence against marginalized communities. And in order to subjugate them, disrupt them, dampen resistance, and also to pick up on something Erin was saying about the relationship of the family to society, it is also a major way to divert attention from the need for social change and to impede organizing around social change, because the whole philosophy has been from the beginning that the reasons why Black children, Indigenous children, impoverished white children, Latinx children, immigrant children, the reason why they are harmed is because of their pathological parents, instead of the truth, which is that they are harmed by white supremacy and racial capitalism and the inequities, the violent inequities, the harmful, injurious inequities that flow from that. And that's the design and function from the beginning. And that's why, I know we'll get to this, but that's a major reason why you can't fix this. It's because it's working as it has always been designed. And it still works the same way today.
Mm-hmm. That's powerful. Thank you. Erin, same question to you.
I just want to say what a great assist. You, Professor Roberts, laid that all out.
Call me Dorothy, please.
So I'm gonna help myself say that Dorothy laid that all out. I think the only thing that I have learned a lot that was really hidden from my education and understanding around this family policing system, this family regulation system, was it's also like deep connection to the organizing that many women of color, Black women, did to actually fundamentally shift economic justice and entitlements in our society, restructuring, right? So when you think of the brain power and work of women and leaders like Johnny Tillman, leaders that I did not know for many years of my life, right? Who led some of them, like the largest multiracial organizing around shifting economic entitlements. They were doing work to change welfare, to change our landscape of what it meant to have care wages. And I think Dorothy and I were able to see each other on Sunday at Every Mother is a Working Mother Network to hear about that 50 years of organizing that's been happening. Mm-hmm. And I add that to our story around the family policing system, because we see very much the trend of racial capitalism in the current design of the family policing system. So when we pick up from the orphan trains of the early 1900s and we move into towards the mid 20th century up into current day, what we see is the emphasis on punishing families to promote a neoliberalist agenda and to promote an agenda that wants to move away from entitlements, right? In a very specific way. So the first way we see this is really through white supremacy when we talk about integration, right? A lot of people talk about integration as a moment in time in the 60s, and they talk about that legacy and how it impacted other systems, but not so much how it impacted the family policing system. There's a great article by Laura Briggs that she just wrote in the Columbia Law Symposium Journal, where she really talks about the fact that Brown versus Board of Education, children were the center. To make children the center, they attacked mothers. And so the white supremacist South, so Louisiana at that particular time in particular, essentially said, you know what we can do is we can attack Black families. We can literally starve out children and get families to leave the South and move up to the North. And also we can make it seem like, why would you want to integrate schools and be with these like terrible Black kids with terrible Black mothers, right? That was part of their strategy. And they did that. They like created that actual propaganda by challenging laws that would essentially then become our modern child welfare system. They created this propaganda saying, you don't want to integrate schools. You don't want to be with these Black kids because do you know how terrible these Black mothers are? They're so unsuitable. They're just having sex with everyone. They're just awful people, right? They use those narratives to try to defeat integration around Brown versus Board of Education. And they said, we shouldn't be like feeding these kids. We shouldn't be giving any social supports to these kids. Like these families are just a hot mess, right? That's the narrative. And so what happens is there becomes a legal response as the world works. You have white supremacist narrative, legal response, white supremacist narrative, legal response. So legal response is essentially a progressive workaround, a liberal workaround that says, okay, we are still going to try to give food and social services to Black kids, but we actually like need to support what Louisiana and these states are saying around white supremacy because, federal state divisions. And we actually just can't give money to families now, I guess. I guess we can only give it if a child is deemed neglected or abused. This is super important. This was a reform that happened. And it was a reform by some well-intended people, right? I think people were trying to get resources to the ground to low-income children. They were responding directly to white supremacy. And they said the only pipeline to resources we can get is if we deem the parent bad, if we deem this child worthy of food, housing, and support because their parents are bad and can't give it to them. That is very different than what freedom fighters were fighting for at that time, which is every mother's a working mother. We need a care income. We care for our kids. We want a society that's economically structured to support us and our families and our communities, that our work is care work and we want it. So the reform is, well, we can only pipeline supports for families if we cut out essentially the Black mother. Black mothers are saying, we want care income. This may seem very heady and a lot in the weeds, but why this is incredibly important is the money pipeline for food resources to low income marginalized children is now the family regulation system. It says to separate families, that's how you get resources. Mm-hmm. So in our current economic structure, the largest open-ended entitlement for children enduring poverty is the family regulation system. So when you're looking for many of those radical ideas like free college, free healthcare, when you're looking for care support and care incomes, spoiler alert, it already exists. It exists within the family policing system as a remnant of that particular legacy. We know how much it costs at minimum to support a child because we do it every month to foster parents. We know how much we can give for free college education because we do it when a child is in foster care. We don't do it well, but what we have predicated all those entitlements is the separation of poor families on the backs of Black mothers, on the history of white supremacy, and in particular, white supremacists that were at a moment in time actively fighting for segregation and actively fighting against the care incomes that Black women were asking for. So I hope that's a lot at one time, but I think it's really important to know, right? Because when we get to where we're going, we're not doing something revolutionary. We are, right? But what we're following is the radical vision of Black women and caretaking for, centuries, essentially.
Mm-hmm. So powerful. And I want to underscore one thing that I heard you saying is like, as folks were advocating for power, as folks were advocating for change, then the system came in to derail those efforts. And as I understand it, in Louisiana, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there were folks who were effectively pitting civil rights against social benefits or some form of support. And some of these folks were saying things like, well, if you want your benefits, go talk to the NAACP, as the NAACP was helping to organize. And so I also wanted to lift up something that our elder in residence, Daphne Muse, said in the chat, that the irony about those terrible Black mothers was that they raised so many of white folks' children, right? And so this is just been really incredible to hear. I hope that you all are thinking and developing your questions and putting them into the Q&A. That's one thing that Alecia will be moderating that after we move through our panel discussion. I just want to keep it moving at this point because there is so many layers to this, as you both have exposed just in your previous comments. I want to give another context quote for the next question, and it's from Whatever They Do, I'm Her Comfort, I'm Her Protector, which is a report produced by the Movement for Family Power. And it says, as Black families, particularly Black mothers, fought for and won the right to public assistance, the moral construction of poverty, or the idea that poverty and its social ills are the fault of individual people who live in poverty, began to saturate the policy making of Republican and Democratic administrations alike. And I think, Erin, you did such a brilliant job of demonstrating that sort of like conservative liberal 1-2 punch in the construction of our child welfare system. I want to ask if there's more you want to say about what were people advocating for and pushing for civil rights inclusion, and anything more that you or Dorothy want to add to that dynamic.
Yeah, thank you. So people were advocating for care incomes. People were advocating for social supports that were both material resources like money, so expanded welfare, so civil rights, right? We were like, before that time, Black people were excluded from welfare, and we're talking about like getting welfare and also getting care incomes. People were asking for schools that taught their curriculum, like, schools that with payment for teachers, all the things that I think people are still asking for now. What we know happens is from 1970s forward, right? We start to really deepen our interests as a society in neoliberalism. And I don't mean us as like me as an individual, but the capital U, us as the social construct and political construct that we live in, right? So then the political structure says, oh, turns out like we are not trying to feed Black people. Like we are not trying to feed like Native people. Like we're not trying to feed Latin people. Like we are really going to build on the moral construction of poverty, like the concept that poverty is someone's particular fault. We are going to fuel that with a different war that started, which was our drug war. And that became a really good marriage to really then say, we are not going to do it. We believe we're going to create this idea that, and just build off the legacy that Black parents, poor parents, parents of color are worse parents. And then we're going to add on top of that, the war on drugs, right? And we're going through all of this history so that when we're saying that we have to abolish it, there is a aligned understanding of the history so that we can move forward with our imagination. And also when we tell people that like we were lied to about crack cocaine, there is some foundation in that. Because I understand deeply, again, as we started, that harm can always exist within any of these political and social constructs. But we have to be super clear that the legacy that we're continuing, people were not asking for the war on drugs, right? Your question was, what were people asking for? They were asking for all those things I just named. They weren't asking for the war on drugs, right? They weren't asking for that. They weren't asking for communities to be completely divested from, which is then what you really see from 1970s on. It was on a pathway to divestment, right? But it really, when Black people were able to access benefits, we really see a vigor. That's my nicest way of putting it, because I'm on a webinar. We see a vigor, right? People are reinvigorated to divest, right? And so we also see a really good job of narrative building to entrench that idea, right? So I think there's a huge shift in the internalized understanding of how people are poor and wealthy. We see, and that then starts to shift priorities and makeup of the particular system that we are now fighting against.
Thank you. Dorothy, what would you add here?
Well, I would just add that everything Erin is saying shows that this is a political decision about how to address the needs of children and families, because we could clearly see at the time of the civil rights movement and the demands that Erin was talking about, a shift in policy toward child removal like we'd never seen before, other than under the weapon of war used against Indigenous people and also during slavery. But coming out of the New Deal, where there was this ethos of now more redistribution of wealth and welfare benefits, when Black people started to demand inclusion in the welfare state, we see that the policy shifted from providing services to families in their homes, which was never adequate, to foster care being the main tool of the child welfare system. So a violent intervention becoming the main so-called service. So Black children, the main service the state offered to Black children was to take them away from their families. And this is a direct retaliation against the gains, a backlash, white backlash against the gains that Blacks were making during the civil rights movement, and a way of trying to stamp out activism. And then I would just bring it up into the 1990s to point out that the war on drugs that Erin was talking about, the war on families through foster care and child removal and foster care, and also the restructuring of welfare to end the entitlement to welfare, to federal benefits, the federal entitlement, so that it's now left to states to come up with whatever stingy programs, but I call it behavior modification program, because the point of giving benefits now is to get people who receive them to get married, to go into low-wage work, and to have fewer children deliberately. It's explicitly stated by Congress that that's the purpose now for welfare. That law passed in 1996. Then the Adoption and Safe Families Act, which sped up termination of parental rights and prioritized adoption over reunification. That's in 1997. And the crime control law in 1993 that helped to expand incarceration. So it's no accident that these three laws are all passed, within 4 years of each other. They're all neoliberal laws. They're all carceral laws. And they also are all laws, when Erin said the vigor was increased, that were fueled by these images of, false images of crack babies, Black mothers, both the welfare queen and the pregnant crack addict. And I'm just stating, of course, these false narratives of Black women that fueled these laws being passed on a bipartisan basis. There was a Democratic Congress and a Democratic president at the time these laws were passed. These are bipartisan laws. Where did all of this popularity for this heightening of punishment and neoliberalism and terror against Black communities come from? A lot of it is this narrative we started out with of the Black mother who is producing criminal children, who needs to be supervised, who needs to be regulated, who needs to be punished. And that brings us, to today, where we are now.
Can I add one thing? I know.
Yeah, please.
I think it's really, like everything, right? And the only thing I want to add is this was a really profound fact that I learned. And my partner Alecia researched when we put out the report. When we're talking about vigor and we're talking about the war on drugs, and I really encourage people to hold this in their mind. And we're talking about how the apparatus of the family regulation system focuses on removal. From 1982 to 2003, funding for removing children increased by 20,000%. 1982 to 2003. I don't know who we're talking to in this audience, but I think everyone can close their eyes and think of all the stories we know from the 80s, the 90s to the 2000s. We can close our eyes, and TV has taught us a lot of images about what communities look like in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. It is my hope, it is my wish, it is my desire that when we close our eyes and see all of our communities that we live in from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, we see that white people benefited. They benefited from the New Deal. They were getting things happening. But for Black communities, that wasn't happening. And what would the world look like if that 20,000% increase didn't go into removing our kids and that ripple impact that we just talked about, but an actual loving investment, which was the care that so many radical visionaries were asking for? 20,000%, guys.
I think it's appropriate to just take a breath. I am reminded of the fact that one of the earliest stories for me personally that I even know on my father's side of the family, being a light-skinned African-American like Erin, who's also wearing an olive green sweater, is that, one of the first stories of my family is a family separation story. It's a story of my grandfather's grandfather being sold from Virginia to the Deep South, right? And that ongoing legacy of is reflected in so many of our institutions. Erin, you were talking about how we have these systems of free healthcare in this context of punishment. And I think about all the families I talk to who have dealt with the juvenile injustice system, who say, and I'm astounded as a Alameda County Juvenile Justice Commissioner when I hear like the kids in jail, now they're offering them Target cards for their families, and they have this kind of construction program. And it's like, well, where, and this is what families have said to me so many times, where was this level of attention when we needed it? And it's been needed for so long. And so I think I want to really shift us to looking forward. I'm so excited about your forthcoming book, Dorothy. I'm hoping you'll tell us a little bit about it. I know it's out on April 5th. I have a copy that's hopefully in the mail. And I'm really excited to shift us towards, how do we move towards a vision, a vision of radical caretaking, I think is what I've heard. How do we move towards that vision? And if Dorothy, you could start with that question and tell us a little bit about your book as well.
Okay, sure. Thanks for mentioning it, Zach. Well, I am really excited that next week, my book, Torn Apart, How the Child Welfare System Destroys Black Families and How Abolition Can Build a Safer World, will be released. It's on, you can pre-order it now if you want. I'll put a link in the, oh, there it is. Okay. Thank you. Let me say, I was, this last year, 2021 was the 20th anniversary of Shattered Bonds. And some people had encouraged me to write a preface and a new edition of Shattered Bonds. And as I thought about all that had happened in those 20 years, I decided I really wanted to write a new book. And most of what happened in those 20 years was that there were lots and lots of reforms. Every child welfare department engaged in some reform. It's very popular to say that you discovered racial disproportionality. This was even a buzzword used, and that you were going to have a task force to reduce the disparities. And the way in which it was thought is this system is okay, but it just has these disparities. If we could reduce the disparities, we could keep the system. That, if the system is necessary, but it has these flaws. If we could just file a class action lawsuit and have the flaws corrected, we can keep the system. And I have engaged over the 20 years in lots of those workshops on racial disproportionality. I served for 9 years on an expert panel that was supposed to reform the child welfare system in Washington State after it was sued and it was found to be committing constitutional violations against children in the foster system there, and saw that there was absolutely no interest in the bonds between those children and their parents. Absolutely not. No matter how much I insisted, we needed to hear from family caregivers. All the attention was on how can we support foster parents more, and how can we get more money to the caseworker so they could investigate more. And it was clear to me after those 20 years that reforms cannot work because the system is designed to destroy families and to subjugate communities and to impede social change. So the other thing that happened was I got involved in the prison abolition movement and began to understand what abolition means and the principles and values of abolition. And that, and this is also in part to your question about how do we move from here, to understand that it's about dismantling piece by piece, step by step, as much in whatever way we can, the current terroristic carceral system. And we can talk more about particular ways of doing that. I know that, Erin is very involved with Movement for Family Power in particular strategies for doing that, as well as the other simultaneous part that has to go on at the exact same time is building a radically different approach to caring for children and families and keeping children safe, which this system doesn't do at all. It does the opposite. It harms children. We haven't even had time to talk about the violent foster industrial complex that steals money from children, that puts them into violent situations, that foments violence, and also that pushes them into juvenile detention, into the streets, into prisons. That's well documented, and often causes the children to commit suicide and to be killed in these institutions. We don't even have time to go into all of that, but we need to replace all of that, and we are replacing it. We've already begun. We have been replacing it. The work that Erin was talking about of the Wages for Housework campaign, that was a campaign to replace neglect by the state and violence by the state against Black children with supports for caring for children and families. So we have already been engaged. Black people have always been engaged in support for families. Also, we have the example of, and I'll also highlight something Erin said at the beginning, that we're not saying that children aren't harmed in families. There's love and there is harm. But the question is, what is the best way to end the harm in families, reduce the harm in families, to keep people in families safe? And the child welfare system does the opposite. It deters, for example, mothers who are survivors of abuse and violence from getting any help because they're afraid, and this happens, that their children will be taken from them. The whole system of mandated reporting turns people who are supposed to be providing services and healthcare and education into spies and reporters, agents of the state, to turn people over, diverting from the care they could be giving and diverting them into a violent system. So it's counter to it. And instead, we can learn from survivors of violence who have rejected carceral approaches and said, we want to develop transformative justice approaches that actually prevent violence, that get to the root causes of violence. So these are some of the ways just sketched out that I write about in Torn Apart. I go through what the system is really like, how it operates, what its design is, the harms that it inflicts on family caregivers and on children, the way in which it spits children out into the streets. Just to give an example of what you were both talking about, how you only get support, which is never enough, if you give up, your family relationships, if you give up custody to the state. A perfect example of that is children aging out of foster care, where they've been kept from their families and their family ties severed. They've been kept in a violent, dangerous foster system. And then when they're 18 or 21, about to age out of it, where in the past, and this still happens too much, children are simply left to fend on their own without any income. If they had income coming in through disability and survivor benefits, it's been stolen often by the state, and they have nothing. They don't have their social relationships with adults who could give them support and advice, and nurturing, have been severed by the state. And now there are these programs coming up that say, okay, we're going to give you training on how to survive as an adult. We're going to give you, a college scholarship if you meet. Now they're still monitored. If you meet, just like parents are, our checklist of everything you have to do. But you fail on one thing, we will deny you that care. Why is it that families aren't given all of that, the money that kept those children in foster care for all those years, all these programs that are coming up now after the fact? Most of these children want to go back to their families, but their families have been disrupted by this system. So I do also discuss then in Torn Apart the ways in which parents who've been impacted by the system, youth who've been impacted by the system, family defense attorneys, organizations like Movement for Family Power, and Joyce McMillan in New York, JMAC for Families, and many, many, many other groups and networks, mutual aid networks, are rising up to dismantle what we have now and simultaneously build up a replacement that will truly care for families and children. So I'll end there. I know
and that's
that
a perfect
Erin has a
segue
lot
to Erin to talk more about that work.
I mean, I could listen to Dorothy forever. I think first, when we're talking about what are things we can do, I invite everyone April 27th from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern time. And I just put the bit.ly into the chat. MF Movement for Family Power and Law for Black Lives are hosting a space called Moving Towards Healing, and talking about reparations, right? We believe that reparations are a framework towards healing. And huge shout out to Jelani Owens, who is a student at CUNY Law, who has been really working to get this together, to really think about ways that we can actually shift the current conditions of society so that we can build safety, we can build protection. We cannot promise a guarantee against harm. As human individuals, it is likely we will harm each other. What we have to do is really think about, how do we address that? How do we build the muscle to address it? And how do we shift the conditions of punishment in our society to create a better world? So I invite people to move towards that. And why we are abolitionists are for many of the things that Dorothy said, right? When we talk about harm, the narrative, and the reason we spent so much time on history, is to create the context for the narrative that we ingest. Many of us are fearful to release these systems because we are worried about what might happen. But let's talk about what is happening. It is wild that we even have and accept an idea that a child can age out of care. Fundamentally. The reason why we accept that as a notion, whether it is 21, 22, 24, they constantly are picking a new number, right? The reason why is because there has to be a number that delineates child from adult to cut off money, because the family policing system relies on entitlements and support only going in one direction. If they were actually to advocate for a world where an adult had access to housing, to food security, to universal basic incomes, right? It would actually fundamentally collapse our family policing system as it exists today. The reason why a child grows up and doesn't have a home is because then they would have to start providing homes for parents, right? Like not everyone will become a caretaker in their life, right? But many children will grow up and become caretakers. And what this system is designed to say is essentially, when you grow up, and if you're already a caretaker in the system and not at the age of we deem to be grown up, right? You don't get stuff. Because if we give you stuff, then what would my job be? I want to lead that parenting class, that training class, that industry, right? And that's incredibly important to understand. That is that violent harm. We are responsible for that violence and fixing that violence and that harm. And so it's not just the physical harm that families endure, not just children, parents endure too, the entire community endures in this particular system. It's not just the missed harm that this system doesn't see. It's not the invisibilized physical, sexual harm that happens every day in family policing systems. It is those structural harms of leaving a society without a social safety net and creating a system that allows us to believe we are protecting children. What is more harmful than that? To allow society to renege on its responsibility to care for each other under the guise of child protection. Like, stop using our kids for that. That's horrible. And you don't have to listen to me, right? Like, you do not have to believe me. And I encourage people not to believe me about this. I encourage you to follow the families who've been fighting for this. I'm going to drop a lot of links in the chat. Go to repealasfa.org. Listen to the mothers and the families that are fighting to end the death penalty. Go to JMAC for Families. Joyce McMillan is a prolific advocate, and she has always said no system that was designed to protect children should ever mimic a system that was designed to torture adults, which is jail. Go to Operation Stop CPS. See how they're going all the time to stand up for families, to fight closed doors. Go to Every Mother is a Working Network. You will see for 50 years they've been fighting for care incomes, right? Go to Starting Over Inc. I saw Bobby in the chat earlier today. Shout out to Bobby, right? The reality is those radical visionaries exist among us in our own society. And we have a duty and an obligation to listen to people that are doing this and to build a world that is actually truly centered on caring and not on an apparatus that keeps particular people employed and moving through a capitalist system. That's not gonna end harm.
So very powerful. Erin and Dorothy y'all have taken us on a journey from describing how Indigenous and Black children were stolen from their families, how immigrant children on orphan trains before they were white were put into other families and made to work to benefit capitalism, to benefit other families, and have talked about how that continues in terms of this modern day as you call it, violent, dangerous foster system, this industrial family regulation system that continues to benefit from those harms. And I want to bring to the virtual stage Alecia Harger, who is a student studying African American studies at UC Berkeley and a community activist fighting for just futures for beyond policing. And I also want to bring to your attention, Erin and Dorothy, Triana Clemens' chat, there are folks who are suffering from these systems right now. I'm hopeful y'all can maybe chat her some resources out here in California, and I will try to do the same. But Alecia, can you please join us? And I'm going to ask that you bring the first question from the Q&A.
Absolutely. So we have a lot of great questions that were sent in to us, but we're unfortunately not going to be able to hit all of them, but I'm going to go vaguely in order for now. So we have a question from Miss Daphne Muse. Do you feel that the Pan-African and civil rights movements played a role in laying the path or having any impact on redefining the Black family?
I would say yes. It is a big answer to that question. So I'm short, I'm going to say yes. I definitely think that there's always been my understanding is historically there's been non-nuclear understandings around what a family is. When we talk about what is the definition of family, you look historically, Pan-African movements, Black liberation movements have always explored more expansive definitions of families than I think more white supremacist legal definitions have. And my understanding is that through line has also been a part of the activism, is really thinking about what are networks of caregiving. Before my grandmother passed away, my grandmother was not an abolitionist. She was like, I don't know what, she was not here for me saying that word. But what she thought it was absurd that you wouldn't keep a kid on your couch. And she was like, you would call the cops on that. You would call CPS. That was not in her framework of imagination, right? So I think that has been a large part of framing that has come into today's understanding of the work that we do in understanding families.
Yeah, I would just add that one great example of Black liberationist organization, the Black Panther Party, provided, as you probably all know, but just to highlight this, free healthcare, breakfasts, education to Black children, starting in Oakland and other parts of the United States. And I think it's an illustration of how we in the Black community and political activists, Black liberationists have provided new forms of mutual aid in the community as part of the struggle for liberation, as well as just as part of what it means to be in community, especially in a nation that treats your children as if they're criminals. And so it's been necessary. Another example I give in Torn Apart is the Black club women's movement after the Civil War and how they developed programs, schools, homes for Black mothers and their children in direct opposition to the way in which white people were treating Black children after the Civil War. I'll say, not to be critical, but of course, there also are strains of patriarchy, respectability, and all of these examples. And just like we were saying about we're not trying to paint this rosy picture that families are all wonderful and there's no conflict or harm, nor is it true that any movement is completely wonderful and free of any kind of discrimination or hierarchy. But to me, what's important is that we have the common mission, horizon, vision of abolition, and then we struggle, on what that means and how to get rid of the impediments to it within our communities and our movements. But there are all these examples. And I think, as Erin has been emphasizing as well, we can look to them for guidance and for hope as well.
And I think we can look to them for learning history around what also didn't work, right?
Yeah.
I think, that's really important because what we know is also all of these really amazing radical ideas in a world that's also filled with racial capitalism and nonprofit industrial complex is that they get co-opted. So my pause at the beginning of the question was like, how awkward do I want to be on a webinar, right? Because for every radical vision, there is, a very strong co-optation that has not become radical, right? And that's the struggle. And I think I want to not be flat on the webinar on solution building, because I think what often happens is that we create lists in our mind, like these are the next steps, when really it's way more round, right? It's a struggle. And I don't know any elder or any activist who won't just say that, like, it's a push and pull. It doesn't mean the idea is a bad idea or a good idea. It just means if we're not committed to the struggle or rounding out the idea, it will not succeed.
Thank you. I think that segues very well into kind of a question that is an amalgamation of a couple that I see in the Q&A section, which is, you have already kind of talked about abolition and reparations as part of our horizon looking forwards. But I'd like you guys to speak to more on that, and also about what it means to heal, as you talk about the spending on family separation increasing so rapidly. How can anyone heal in a system that so continuously harms?
Well, one thing I'd like to say about that is a connection between reparations and healing, and to point out that reparations, although it should include cash money to people who have been harmed by the system, and also to allow for thriving of families without having to rely on a punitive child welfare system. It can also include forms of healing, like helping family members find each other, children who've been separated from their families, being able to find and reunite with their families. And so we can think of healing as an integral part of the of the kinds of resources. I find myself often saying we need to give the material resources that families need, and part of the resources can be healing. I also say that healing is an important part of transformative justice. I'm not an expert on it, so I feel I pause because I don't want to, pretend that I know exactly how to engage in these processes. There are people who know how to do this. It's not just a word, it's a practice, it's a process. But that process involves healing relationships. And to me, that's one of the things that makes it distinctive from the carceral approach, that it includes something that the carceral approach, putting people in prison, doesn't heal anything. It doesn't heal the perpetrator of the violence, and it doesn't heal the person who survived the violence. So healing is important to that as well. And when we think about dealing with the harms that do happen in families, I think that healing is an important component of that.
Kara Page once said at a space I was in that like healing justice is a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
It's a strategy. It's not a movement. It's not a particular destination. That's very different than the punishment model. The punishment model is like right or wrong, healed or not healed. We also have to understand that like healing means the active verb, right? Ing, you're doing it, right? Which means we may not achieve it at one time, but it is a destination that we are striving towards. And so when we're talking about healing, all the things that Dorothy said, reparations, like, transformative justice, all the things are part of it. But also, we would be healing if we could sustain political struggle together. The muscle to actively be in political struggle. And back to where we're at 2:30 from beginning to end to round us out, right? The network, right? The network of family and social political identity, right? When you disrupt that network, it becomes incredibly difficult to sustain the muscle, to sustain enough stability to create the stamina to move through struggle and conflict. That can be healing, right? And so when we talk about change and we talk about healing, there is political healing, there's financial healing, there's material resources, there's structural that we need to do. But we cannot ingest the narrative that these systems have brought us that we will be healed at the end. That is very family regulation system. Like you got to a finding, you completed this parenting, got this destination. We must embrace the process, the stamina, and the dignity of healing, and the many ways that will come forward in this work.
Yeah, if I just want to shout out, Erin, what you were saying about healing as what happens in engagement, political engagement. People often ask me this question, how do you keep going? You have a smile on your face. How do you smile, when you're battling all of these atrocious forces and it seems like there's not that much change and you've been doing this for 30 years and, you're still doing, and I always say it's being in collaboration, engagement with people who are in the struggle. That's healing. And like where we were on Sunday, it's healing to be able to celebrate together and to be able to be inspired by each other and know that you've got comrades that are going to continue arm in arm and toward this common vision that we have. I think that's an important part of healing for ourselves as well as for our society, right? Yeah.
Right on. Thank you, Dorothy. Alecia, are we okay to should we close out?
I have to run. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I just want to thank you both.
I
want to thank you both for your struggle, for inspiring us. And this conversation is to be continued. The struggle continues. Thank you, Erin, for that invitation. Moving towards healing reparations as a demand and legal strategy happens April 27th, 5 p.m. The link is in the chat. I hope you will join Movement for Family Power and Movement for Black Lives, and we will continue this conversation and continue the struggle. Thank you all. Thank you, Black Studies Collaboratory, Abolition Democracy Initiative. We appreciate you. Thank you, Alecia. Thank you, Lee, Tiana, Gilberto, Elena, Marcy, Tiana. Thank you all. And thank you, Erin and Dorothy, once again. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.